Well, this was a stretcher used in the Civil War. Which one? Did you take a picture of it? I've never noticed that before. So good eye on that one. Again, this was actually used in the Civil War and afterwards. Our guys here don't do things to, fake things to make them look real. If we have something on display and if it's fake, we'll let you know. But if it's something like that, we don't know. I mean, I've never noticed that before. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, a lot of the items there you've seen were possibly used here at the fort, but they were used in one shape or another at some hospital. I get kind of queasy and like weak-headed when I look at some of that stuff, so I don't look at it too often.
I would faint.
See, there's the fort kind of making those noises I was talking about. Nothing scary or anything, just neat. Kind of show you how the things work here at the fort. Before we get on the officer's row, they had a thing called pro rata. You would get a room based on your rank. So a lieutenant would get 1 room, a captain might get 2 rooms, a major would get 3 rooms in the kitchen, and so on. Commanding officer of the fort would get a whole building, regardless of who he was, or how many people he had in his family. And so, at one point, when the morgue became available as living quarters, there was 4 guys on the list. There was a couple majors, a colonel, and a captain above, Thomas Knotson, our post surgeon. Well, he had talked to those guys while the post commander was away, and he got their approval. He says, no way that they want to live in a morgue. So the doctor moved his family up in there and everything, and the commanding officer came back to the fort. Unfortunately for the doctor, all the other officers had gone on to, scouts, personal business, court martials, and things like that. So they weren't around to tell their side of the story. So the commanding officer, Colonel McKenzie, saw the doctor up there and said, you've got to move all your stuff out of there because there's 4 guys ahead of you on the list. And he tried to convince the colonel that none of the men wanted to live in a morgue, but he said, since they're not here and you have no paperwork, I can't prove it. And this is just how the paperwork kind of, sometimes would interfere in these men's lives. Previously, McKenzie put in paperwork to the quartermaster to get ammunition for his different companies. And then once he got the ammunition, he distributed it out. Well, somebody found out that there was some red tape that he didn't follow quite right. All those different companies had to file for the ammunition and then get the ammunition themselves. So he had broke some kind of regulation, got chewed out, horribly over this tiny bit of, paperwork. And so when it came time for him to be the guy with the paperwork problem, he just let the doctor have it and wouldn't let him live there. Kicked him out, made him live in a tent for 2 days, and then officer's quarters 10 was done. And so he moved in there. And it really wasn't so much of an argument anymore, but it just makes you wonder, who would want to live in a morgue other than a doctor? Now again, we got our chapel up here, and not a whole lot happened there. One of the chaplains did die of dyspepsia, or I guess an upset stomach. So I imagine it must have been a very upset stomach to kill somebody back then. It did have a storm cellar, so that's kind of a storm cellar, I should say. So that's kind of a neat feature of our chapel. Whenever there was inclement weather, a lot of people could get under there. And right now it's just occupied by a lot of spiders and whatnot, so I don't want to go down in there. This is our chapel. Not a whole lot went on here other than, churches and school lessons and stuff. See, then in the beginning, they started off, they had one of the soldiers, one of the first school teachers, and he was the 24th infantryman, one of the Buffalo soldiers, and he taught the officers' children in the morning. And there really wasn't, there was a town there, so if there was any bankers, any lawyers that had children that were school age, they may have been allowed to come here. A lot of the frontier schools would allow, the upper crust to come with the officers' kids. Then in the afternoons, they would have the enlisted men's children come here and go to school. So it was just a half day. And then it was this is probably one of the most busiest buildings here at the fort because on the weekends, the evenings and the weekends, it was used by the soldiers. A lot of the soldiers didn't know how to read and write, so this gave them an opportunity to do that. And a lot of the soldiers wanted to advance in the Army. So you become a corporal or a sergeant here by going to school, learning some of your lessons. There even was one case of a sergeant becoming a lieutenant. So that's usually unheard of. You usually get like a battlefield commission, become a sergeant, becomes a lieutenant. But not very often does the studying and all the work. And possibly one of these frontier soldiers invented the GI Bill because he was a Polish soldier. He was really used to the Army. This didn't happen here at Fort Concho, but I'm just giving you an idea of what kind of went on in a place like this. He joined the Frontier Army here in the United States, didn't speak a word of English. But because he was familiar with Army life, he knew a lot of the terminology because it was all based on French or English Army stuff. So he started learning those terms and then learning English that way. When he was done with his 5-year enlistment, he learned English well enough that he could go on to law school and become a lawyer. And that was his plan from the start, to come over to America, learn English in the Army, and then go on and pursue his success and stuff. So it was kind of a neat little thing going on in this time period. And also, the soldiers, let's see, I mentioned they would learn here and everything. So, and any questions here?
Where was the shelter?
The shelter's in behind us.
It's outside.
Yeah, I can show you the entrances there, but I don't have any keys to get inside. But now I don't know too much of happening. Again, we did have one chaplain die, and he died more of an upset stomach and things like that. There now, but I imagine, West Texas weather days were really useful for these people. Some of the officers' quarters also had some cellars and stuff, but we're not really sure, how many of them did. But this one did for sure. Originally, this was going to be the kitchen for another officer's quarters, but they decided to turn it into a chapel instead. And it became a schoolhouse after that as well. So it's a very, very busy building. Now imagine, until they had this building as a chapel, most of their church service was held in somebody's living room, one of the mess halls, or an old bloody hospital tent. So this was a very vast improvement.
So did they have an ice house here?
No, they did not. The closest, in fact, and that's a good thing you bring that up, because we'll be talking about Edith Grierson, who needed ice to stay alive, and they had to ship it in from Dallas-Fort Worth.
Wow.
Now, they were pretty advanced here. If you think about what they had available, at that time, 1878, they already had the telegraph here. And it's a direct link to Washington, D.C. So something happened in Washington, D.C., they would find out about it here maybe a minute, 3 minutes later. However long it took that electrical impulse to travel on those wires. They also had a lime kiln and a lime house. What they would do is they'd take some of these old limestones that weren't very, they weren't good for building. So they would crush them up, burn them in the lime kiln, and get the resulting lime to help make the mortar and quicklime for cleaning up the sinks and the latrines and whatnot. They also had a horse-powered wood machine that would cut wood over behind the quartermaster building. So they had a lot of, and the most neat thing that they had was a water pump down by the river that brought water up to all these houses. Again, you'd have to boil it, but you didn't have to go haul it from the river. Now we're coming up to Officers' Quarter 7 here shortly. And that's a pretty interesting story, because in the 1920s, when this was kind of an abandoned building, a bunch of hobos or homeless people had started living in there. Now at one point, 2 guys were in there, and they were in the habit of trapping nutria out by the river and selling their hides or whatnot. And these 2 guys got in a tussle over something, and one of them killed the other guy. Well, after that was vacated, they shut the building up and kind of kept everybody away from there. But every now and then, people would see lights flickering up in the upstairs window, as if somebody's walking along with a candle or a little lantern. And nowadays people see it once in a while. I've never seen it as many times as I've been out here, but that's one of the strange buildings here at Fort Concho.